Well, good morning, brothers and sisters. Thank you so much for joining me today in our Bible reading plan here at First Baptist Church. We are in the book of 1 Kings, chapter 1. So I hope you've already read this chapter and, as always, written in your journal what the Lord said to your heart. After reading this chapter, what I wrote about was political intrigue and, the hunger for power, how it's really not new because you see it so evidently, so clearly in this particular chapter. And David is near the end of his life. And Solomon is the one that God has told him is to be his successor. But another of his sons, Adonijah, has a different idea. He wants to be king. And so in chapter 1 of 1 Kings, in verse 5, now Adonijah, and the son of, that's one of David's many wives, exalted himself, saying, I will be king. And then he made preparation to rally supporters, and he had a lot of supporters, including some very powerful one like Joab, who had been the general, if you will, of David's army, or Abiathar, one of the two high priests in Israel at the time, along with Zadok. They and some others supported Adonijah and his personal desire to be king. But he also had some very powerful opponents. In verse 8, Zadok, the other co-high priest, Benaiah, another one of the military leaders, Nathan, the prophet, Shimei, Rei, and the mighty men, the strong fighting soldiers that belonged to David, were not with Adonijah. So here's this guy, David's son, who wanted to be king and had supporters, but he also had very powerful opponents. And he took it upon himself to have himself anointed king, this political maneuvering, so to speak. And in response, while David is still alive, down in verses 33 and following, he gives very specific instructions for his supporters to go ahead and anoint Solomon king, and they do that, and the people in Jerusalem rally around Solomon. And when Adonijah and his supporters realized what David has done, that David the king had appointed and had his son Solomon anointed as king, in verse 49, then all the guests of Adonijah, those who were supporting him, were terrified. And they arose and each went on his way. And Adonijah was afraid of Solomon, and he arose and went and took hold of the horns of the altar, hoping that Solomon would not have him killed there. And of course, Solomon does not have him killed at that time. Adonijah later does something that leads to his own execution. But for now, Solomon lets him live. And I was reading all of that. I got to thinking how, we have political intrigue today. We have maneuvering. We have people who are more concerned with their own power, their own privilege, their own prestige, their own position in politics and in other, business or anywhere else as well. It's just life, but it's not new. We have it here in the Bible, and there are many other cases, examples of it in the Bible. We have it in history. I mean, if you study history, political intrigue, the maneuvering for power has always been part of human existence. It's not new. But here's the word of caution, the lesson for us. Be careful. Be careful. Because Adonijah, in opposition to God's will, was able to rally supporters. How many of those supporters knew that God had told David Solomon was to be his successor? How many of those supporters knew what David was really thinking? Adonijah was able to manipulate them. Be careful, because things are not always as they appear. Be careful, because what you see publicly may only be part of the story, part of the truth, and you don't know what's going on behind the scenes. You don't always know all the story. You don't always know all the truth. So be careful, because those who practice political intrigue, who are hungry for power, can manipulate us, well-meaning people, sincere people. We can be easily manipulated by people who know how to manipulate us, who know how to tell us what we want to hear, who can excite us, and we don't know everything going on. We don't know the whole story. We don't know the whole truth. We don't know what's happening behind the scenes. So the word for me as I read this is political intrigue is always at play, always has been, always will be. Be careful that you're not a pawn in somebody's hand. And it can be somebody you actually like and support, and without you knowing it, they could be manipulating you. So be careful. Do not sell your soul. Do not sell your heart to anyone involved in these political intrigues, because you never know the whole story. So be very, very careful and give your full loyalty to Jesus and be cautious everywhere else. Well, that's what came to me as I read this chapter. I pray you have a blessed day, and I'll see you tomorrow as we look at 1 Chronicles chapter 28. Remember, at times we're jumping back and forth between Samuel and now Kings and Chronicles, because they cover the same history pretty much, but sometimes one gives us more details than the other. So tomorrow we'll be in 1 Chronicles 28. I'll see you then.